Thank you very much, everybody, for coming along to this first of the series of the Smarter Irrigation for Profit webinars. If anybody does have further trouble, Tennille's online now and her phone number is on the screen, so please take it down if you are needing a little bit more help to get online or with anybody in your groups. I'd like to welcome you all to the first of the Smarter Irrigation for Profit Phase 2 Dairy Projects webinar series. So for those that you don't know me, and I don't know all of you, I'm Kath Leskin. I'm the lead of Soils and Irrigation within the farm team at Dairy Australia. And I'm also the project leader for the DA-led What's My Yield Gap, Maximising Water Productivity Smarter Irrigation project. And that's just one of 4 irrigation projects that we're running in the dairy industry. So the Smarter Irrigation for Profit project, it's a cross-sector collaborative project, and it's supported by funding from the Australian Government, Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment, and it's part of the Rural R&D for Profit program. So other supporters of the dairy programs are Dairy Australia, Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture and the University of Southern Queensland, and Agriculture Victoria. You can see here at the bottom of this slide, these are the further contributors and partners within the Smarter Irrigation Collaborative project. So there are 4 projects within dairy. The one that DA is leading is the What's My Yield Gap, Maximising Water Productivity. James Hills, who's one of our guest speakers today, is leading the Beyond Water Smart Advancing Dairy Irrigation System Performance, and that's from Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture. We've also got AgVic running the Scaling Irrigation Management to support whole farm operations. So that's surface irrigation project up in the Murray Dairy area. And we've got Precise Real-Time Automated Irrigation for Cotton and Dairy. And that's a partnership between the University of Southern Queensland and TIA, or Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture. So it's pretty exciting. We've come to the end of our first year of sort of preparation work, getting people on board to get the projects happening. And we're just starting to collate and collect a lot of data as well from our first year. So moving into our second year, and we're running this series of webinars. So we have got this series organised. The 9th of July is today, using pasture.io on your farm and the impact of monitoring yield under irrigation. We're really lucky to have the speakers we've got today, and I'll introduce them in a minute. 28th of July, we're looking at an Optimising Energy Efficiency in Irrigation Systems webinar. On the 5th of August, looking at using weather forecasting and soil information for irrigation decisions. And on the 19th of August, looking at how we use soil moisture monitoring and data to maintain soil moisture in the readily available water zone. So a few really good webinars to follow this one. Further information will be sent out very, very shortly. We're just finalising the details of the next 3 webinars. Today's webinar, we'll be looking at the importance of measuring pasture dry matter and how we're using that in Smarter Irrigation. So James Hill's going to start us off on that one. How can pasture.io be used to assist with measurements and the collecting of pasture data? So Ioan Malfino will be talking to us about that area. And then James is going to come back and we'll be looking at some real live farm examples demonstrating benefits of the benefit of knowing what your pasture dry matter growth rates are under irrigation and how you can use that to improve your performance. And we're hoping to have about 15 minutes at the end for questions. But as Marguerite has just, or we heard Marguerite said that chat is there. Please use the chat to ask questions as we go, and we'll see how we go with getting those questions done. So our first speaker is James Hills. James is the centre leader for dairy, grains and grazing at the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture. He's also the project leader, as I mentioned before, of the Beyond Water Smarter Irrigation project. And he's the science leader for the What's My Yield Gap Smarter Irrigation project as well. So James is involved in 3 of the 4 projects quite heavily in this Smarter Irrigation for Profit project. So he's a very busy man. We are very lucky to have James on board today to be able to pass on his knowledge. James has a particular interest in the variability in farming systems and measuring and managing this variability to improve farm efficiency. So I'll pass to you now, James. I'll stop sharing my screen. Again, please put your questions in the chat and we will ask them as we go or at the end of James's first session. And if you're in the group, so at Tocal, at Mount Gambier and at Mount Compass, please get your coordinator to put any questions that you've got. That'll be great. Okay, welcome James.
Yeah.
I'll stop my share and get you to start sharing.
Okay. Okay, can you see that?
Yep, fantastic.
Very good. Okay, thanks for the introduction, Kath. So this particular project, the title there, What's My Yield Gap? It's really developed from some work that we did earlier on under SIP 1, where we went out and measured a lot of farms and recognised that there seemed to be a very significant gap between what farmers were achieving in production and what they potentially could achieve. And under irrigation, we noticed that one of the big issues was the way in which irrigation was occurring. So there was a big yield gap. And so one of the things I think that really became very clear with regard to understanding the issue was just simply the ability to go out and to measure what was happening under those irrigation systems. And so measuring growth rates is certainly the focus that we've got within this particular program now that we're looking at, and using that information to help us to understand what's happening and to get practice change occurring. So why are we interested in measuring pasture? Irrigation practice has a significant impact on pasture growth rates and dry matter yields. And this measure of growth rate can be a clear signal of poor irrigation practice and a good motivator for practice change if compared against optimum or modelled results. And so what's interesting, when we particularly early on, I think back in about 2015, started measuring on farms without interacting necessarily with the farmers, is that we found very clearly that the rates of growth, so the growth rates under the pivots that we were measuring were significantly poorer than what they potentially could be. And back in 2015-16 season down in Cressy, where we worked on one particular site, what you'll notice here, the blue line, is that during that season, this farmer under their pivot was irrigating, put about 6 megalitres per hectare on his pasture at that time, but the actual growth rates there are only at about 40 kilos, 30 to 40 kilos of dry matter per hectare per day on average throughout the summer period. And we had a number of other farms that we were monitoring as well, and one farm down the road at Montana, they were irrigating and in a similar climate situation, but they were getting about 50 to 60 kilos of dry matter per hectare. So that's the red line here. And so just having collected that data and then fed that data back to the farmers, what the farmer looked at and said was, well, actually, I'm achieving only 30 to 40 kilos of dry matter per hectare per day. I've got an opportunity loss of around 20 kilos of dry matter. If I actually do a calculation on that, then on my 117 hectare pivot, I've got an opportunity loss of about 210 tonnes of pasture, and I've got to replace that with grain. There's an extra cost to that in the system. So that's costing me, and his quick back of the envelope calculation was about $40,000 over 3 months in the season. So having collected that data under that pivot and having had a look at it and the impact of that on his production, it motivated that farmer to start to think about what was happening, why it was a poor performance, even though a lot of irrigation had been put on. And what was really clearly identified is that the simple scheduling of irrigation wasn't matching up with what was required to keep the soil moist, particularly within the readily available zone. And so changes were made. And so in 17-18, so the 17-18 season, what we saw is that he was achieving under that same pivot about 60 to 80 kilos of dry matter per hectare per day through the season here, particularly in the summer, which is a significant improvement with less water input over that season. And they were very similar in terms of the total amount of rainfall. So simply going out and measuring pasture growth rates and then using that as a means of challenging yourself with regard to what you are doing compared with what you could be doing is certainly a motivator to say, right, I need to change my practice. And if we look at the opportunity cost between the first and the last year in this 3 years of assessing this particular site, we went from an average of about 30 to 40 kilos of dry matter up to about 70 kilos of dry matter per hectare per day over that irrigation season. And so it was even bigger than what was seen as a comparison between himself and a neighbour when you actually look at the capability of achieving an even greater production. So he estimated that 70 to 80,000 was the lost opportunity, and depending on grain prices, it could be even over $100,000. So just a really clear message that going out and measuring can really give you some valuable data on what you're achieving, look at what you potentially could achieve, and then motivate you to change your practice. If we just look at some of the examples from a number of the sites that we looked at over those 3 years, at this particular instance in the 16-17 year at Cressy, what we noticed when we were measuring our pasture dry matter is that we had a big drop in November. And when we actually looked at what was happening on that site, just by collecting this dry matter, we could line up the issue with our pasture growth rates with the fact that there were a number of paddocks under that particular pivot that were cut for silage. And what that meant is that the pivot was stopped for a period of time while that silage was being cut and removed, and then started again. And so that had a big impact on his scheduling and a big impact on the soil moisture within that zone and therefore on pasture growth. So collecting that data really gave that farmer some important feedback on the impact of that particular practice on his pasture growth. If we look at this example from Sisters Creek in 16-17 down here, so here is our dry matter production. Again, the blue is the average and the red is the minimum and the green is the maximum. So we were measuring quite a number of paddocks. But if we look at the average, what we notice is a big drop off here from December into January. And simply what happened was that they got low on their water. They'd stopped watering for a period of time here because water was getting low. And then they started up again around late January with some rainfall and then continued through here. But you can certainly see the massive impact of that period of time where their dam ran low and they stopped for a period of time on pasture production. And then the significant period of time that it took for that pasture, once they started irrigation at somewhere late in January, up again before it actually started to take off. So really valuable information coming back to the farmer around the impact of his practice on his pasture production. Here's another example in Riona in 16-17. And so what we see here is we were getting upwards here of 80 kilos of dry matter per day, and then a really big drop in late January. And what's interesting on this particular site, this is a little bit further back off the coast, and the evapotranspiration rates on this site weren't very high, but the farmer was getting the message, oh, I've got to irrigate more, I've got to irrigate more. And so they put a lot on, but they were putting on significantly more than what was required. So they were over irrigating, and there was a significant drop in pasture production and at that point there, and then it took a little while to recover that back again. So whether you're underwatering or overwatering, measuring that pasture growth rate under your pivot can really give you a good indicator of what's happening and where it's going wrong. So just really want to make sure we get that clear message out there that it's really important to be able to measure, to understand what's happening, and to give you the motivation to make changes to your system to see that you're actually achieving what you could potentially be achieving under irrigation system. So within SIP2, we've got a situation where we're doing a whole heap of modelling of our sites, looking at what could be an optimal production so that we can have a benchmark that we can compare against and say, well, what am I achieving if I'm measuring against what I potentially could be achieving? So it's really important that we collect that data. Now, there's a whole heap of ways that you can measure. So plate meters, sensors on the back of your bikes, they could be optical sensors, infrared. We can use drones and we can even use satellites. And obviously these different methods require a different amount of input. the plate meters and going out with bikes and flying drones needs a fair bit of labour input. And so one of the things that we've been looking at is, well, what sort of technology is out there that can automate that process of collecting growth rate data so that we can use that as a means of benchmarking against what we're achieving now against what we could be achieving. And this is where pasture.io has come into the picture. It's a system that enables the collection of growth rate data in more autonomous way so that we can have that as a measurement to be able to assess what's going on rather than necessarily having to go out all the time and measure by hand. And so that's where we've come to this point in the project. We decided to bring pasture.io in as a means of collecting that data and seeing how useful that is in this process of understanding our yield gap within this project. So that's probably enough of an introduction. We can probably hand over to Yuan from pasture.io to take us through pasture.io as a tool.
Thanks, James.
Thanks, James. Has anybody got any questions for James? I'm checking the chat. Nobody's put anything in there. That's a really good introduction and looking at how what can be achieved if we've looked at, you know, what we are growing. So monitoring that, measuring what we're at, looking at the potential, which we'll be talking further about as well later on, and what might motivate people to change their practices. And it might just be getting the scheduling and the timing of irrigation right. No questions. Oh no, I have got one from Beck Burgess, which Beck's hosting a group at Mount Compass today. James, do you totally discount the use of visual assessment of pasture? It's a tricky one, Beck.
Do I discount the use of visual? Because I didn't have it in that list. No, visual assessment of pasture. So we've done quite a bit of work on that down here where farmers have used tools and calibrated themselves, and then after a period of time they've stopped using it and they visually assess those pastures. And no, that's certainly different farmers can have a pretty good ability of assessing generally what's going on there. But the issue is that over time you can become probably uncalibrated in a sense, and you make an assumption about what you're achieving. And what's interesting is that, take for instance that Cressy site, that farmer was actually very comfortable with what they were doing. The pastures were green. They were doing a reasonable job, they thought, of managing that system, and they had a certain stocking rate for that particular system because they had an estimate of what was going on there. But they didn't realise that they had so much more potential, even though they were going out and visually assessing it to do their rotations. They certainly were way under what they could achieve. No, I'm not discounting it. I think going out and assessing pastures visually is very important, having a look at what's happening. But you've got to be careful that what you assess visually and what is actually happening can be out by a fair bit.
Yep. Okay, thanks, James, and thanks for the question, Beck. We actually might keep moving because it is we started a little bit late and we've got a bit to get through still, and it's nearly 11. So Dr. Yuan Molfino is the next speaker. Yuan's worked in New Zealand, Argentina and Australia in on-farm, like farming, in research, extension and teaching. So he's got a very broad understanding of dairy farming. Yuan is with pasture.io and is going to talk to us about the pasture.io technology. He'll be supported by Ollie Roberts, who's online as well. Ollie's the founder of pasture.io. So we're very fortunate again to have these people being able to spend their time today talking to us about some of the technology that we are using in Smarter Irrigation. So I'll hand over to Yuan.
Yes, thanks, Kath.
Can you share your screen, please?
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen now. Can everyone see it?
We can just see. Yep, and if you put it onto, yep, great.
Yeah. Okay, thanks everyone. We are very happy to be on board. I'm just going to give you a bit of a background of pasture.io first, a few slides, and then we jump into the tool. I've been working now with Ollie for the last 2 years, I guess. And before that, in Australia, I've been working at Sydney Uni, mainly conducting research. So Pasture.io, we like to say that we are much more than a company that measures grass. We are trying to be a decision support tool. We are trying to gather the information and make the farmer's life easier by helping him or her making more informed decisions. About the Pasture.io, well, Oli is today with us. Oli started measuring grass in his family farm in 2005 or before, and he measured grass for a long time, like 10 years or something like that. It's a lot of information using different tools, and he wanted to do something with all that information, so he started upgrading that spreadsheet, and he developed Pasture.io just to record information and also to start thinking about how to better plan grazings. And in 2014, he developed Pasture.io as a free platform. So still we have a free version that every farmer can use. And then a few years later, he decided to take it even further, and he decided to try to make it a bit more automatic. So he started thinking about satellites, and he developed what we call the version 1, so Pasture.io V1, which was commercialized first in 2017, 2018. And now we are very close to release the version 2 of Pasture.io, which is a much faster and better version of the platform with different features. And we're very excited to release that very, very soon. So that's a bit of a background. We are, this slide is not up to date, but we are a small but strong team all across Australia. So we work very well together, and we are very customer orientated. So we try to, many of the features that we develop in our platform are just features that the users request. So we are very open, and we like to listen to the feedback of the users, and we try to develop our platform based on their requirements. And that's a very important part for us. Talking about satellites and how do we measure the grass, and I guess why are we different from other companies? What we do is we are not just using the image from the satellite itself, because we know that we have some limitations when we have too much grass or too little grass based on the indexes that we use. So what we do, we combine the imagery together with weather records or weather readings from obviously from your local weather station, plus farm records, for example, grazing events, fertilizations, harvesting events. And we put all that data together into a machine learning environment to get the pasture cover of that paddock, to get the growth rate of that paddock, and then obviously of your farm, of the farm of the user. So we are quite different to other companies. Using the machine learning has a lot of advantages, very dynamic. And we are also not running a model for every farm, but we're also running a model for a specific paddock. So every single paddock will have a model running every single day. And so the model keeps improving over time. So that's why I think we are very different from other companies. And here it's very important to say that for us, it's very important, the farm records. It's very important that the user enter the farm records. Without farm records, the accuracy of the pasture cover and the growth rate is diminished. Yeah, so it's very important that we have the three things together working at the same time. Otherwise, we lose accuracy. So that's why I encourage a lot of our users to enter the grazings on a daily, on a weekly basis. We have different ways to do it, but it's a critical part in the equation. This is obviously, it's a lot of numbers, you're not going to see it very clearly, but just to give you an idea of how are we constantly calibrating our models, trying to achieve, to be more accurate over time. And where are we going? So this is just a snapshot of what we see in the future. We want to have a smart farm, to graze smarter, to be in all the devices for the users, to integrate whatever sensor the farmer is using, like weather station, paddock sensor, sorry, or work with the contractors. The idea is to put all the information together in one platform where the user can see everything and make the life easier and make better decisions. So we are working toward this. It's a long way to go, but we are making very good progress. So now we're going to jump into the tool. So today I'm going to just give you a snapshot of what the tool looks like, what is the platform looks like, and trying to be, there's a lot to go on, but just going to give a quick overview of the platform. So this is the main dashboard that the user will see when you sign in. So obviously here we have the feed widget with all the paddocks that you have on your farm. Each paddock is a bar. The different colors represent, if blue is if it's irrigated, and red if it's non-irrigated, and the green bar represents the growth rate on this axis. So this gives you a quick overview of all the paddocks on your farm. Here on the left corner, we have the average cover of your farm and the average growth of your farm. Then we have a series of graphs, so where you can see your farm pasture cover, and the different lines are the different years. So the more data you have, the more, obviously, the more lines and you will see and you can compare between different years. The same with the farm pasture growth rate. And then lately we've been incorporating different tools. For example, the pasture forecast, where you can see the forecast for the next 7 days related to the pasture growth and the daily growth. We also have a tool here, which is a leaf emergency forecast. This is all based on local weather data as well. Then we have the KPIs, so the key performance indicators. These ones are very, very useful, and I really like this table. And again, the more information the user enters, the more accurate and the more KPIs you will have in this table. For example, you will see the pasture area, the grazing allocation per day in hectares, the grazing cover of this week and last week. So you can compare, you can track how you're going in the last 2 weeks. You can see the pasture intake per animal, the pasture growth rate demand. So different KPIs, and you can see the variation between weeks. And again, this is only going to be populated if the user enter the grazing and enter the number of cows and some information that we require in order to calculate this. If the user is just using pasture.io to see how much grass you are growing here, you won't have those KPIs because we need that information to calculate that. Scrolling down, you will have the map of your farm. You can see all the different paddocks. And here you can see, for example, in this farm, we have 2 herds. So you will see the position of your herds. And for example, if you click in one paddock, you get all the information of the paddock, like the cover, the growth rate, if it's assigned to a different herd, if it's irrigated or not. So a bit of quick information of your paddock. The other nice thing that we included here, that here you will see the different herds. So if you click on the different herds, you will only be able to see the paddocks that are assigned to those herds. Yeah, so here we see all the farm, but sometimes you only want to see the paddocks that are assigned, for example, for the milkers, so you can have a better understanding or a better view of those paddocks. So this is the main dashboard. Then we have the menu here on the left. The first tab is paddocks. So if you click on paddocks, you will see all your paddocks with the name and some characteristics that we need to set in order to enter this information to the model. And the main one is if it's irrigated or not, what type of pasture or crop do we have, and here you can assign it to a herd as well. So by clicking here, you can change the information of these paddocks. This is something that you won't change much. Once you set it up, usually you don't change it much. So this is information regarding paddocks. Then the following tab is readings. And here in readings, we have two sub-tabs. The first one is farm readings. So here's where you are gonna be seeing your reading. So each column is one date. So basically, we can potentially get one reading per day because the satellites fly over your farm every single day. However, based on mainly on cloud conditions, we are not able to use that imagery. So yes, you can have a reading every day, but could be not the case. Of all our customers, on average, we have a reading every 3 or 4 days, which for me is more than enough to make good grazing decisions. So every 3 days or every day, you will see the readings here. So first you will see the farm average reading here. Then if you have irrigation, we split it into 2, irrigated at dryland. And you can see the pasture cover, and in between brackets, you see the growth rate. And then you will have that for every single paddock. Yeah, every single paddock you will see the reading. For example, here is a white, it's a blank square. This means that we were not able to use the image of that paddock. So sometimes you won't have the reading of that paddock. If you are using the free version of Pasture.io, this obviously will not be populated with information from the models, but you will be able to upload the readings that you do with the play meter or the CDAX. Yeah, so you can go do your pasture walk every week or every 3 days, and you can upload your readings, and you will see this exactly the same thing, but the figures that you are entering. So you can import readings. You can also export all these readings. Another thing that we have, if you go to a paddock and you think that this figure is very, very inaccurate, you can override this figure. So this is all regarding readings. The other feature that we add based on customer request was the satellite imagery. So a lot of farmers were asking, okay, we are seeing the figure, the pasture cover itself, but we would like to see the image. And so we developed this feature where you can see the paddocks, and you can see, for example, in this case, NDVI for the different paddocks. And this, I believe, is a really powerful tool because you are able to see differences within your paddock. Where are you growing more grass in the same paddock? And you can also see if you have creeks, or if you are growing more grass close to the bush, or it's really important. Also, people that are doing different treatment for fertilizations, they're able to see differences within the paddock. So I think it's a really nice feature, and we have a really good feedback from some farm managers that are really liking this feature as well. And by clicking on the arrow, you can go through different dates, and you can see the difference between days as well. So I think this is a really, really nice feature as well. The following tab is herds. And here we ask the users to enter information about the herds. And this is important to plan the grazings. And you can enter as many herds as you want. Some people only enter the milkers, but here in this farm, we see a lot of different herds. And of each herd, you can click on the green arrow, and you are gonna able to enter information about general information about the herd. That we use this information to calculate some things related to the grazings and the nutritional requirements of the cows. But this is again, some people use more than other all this information, but this is related to herds. The following tab is grazing, and here for me is one of the most important ones, and is where magic happens, I guess. You have two different tabs here, planner. So for us, the important thing is we are telling you how much grass are you growing, and how much grass do you have, and how much grass do you have in all your paddocks, but we want to help you make the decision of where are the cows going next, and how to make that decision. And we also need for you to tell the model, as I said before, where are you grazing? So to enter the grazings, we have two different ways to do it. One way to enter grazings is to go here to the main dashboard and go to the paddocks, and you say, okay, I want to graze this paddock. So you go here to this tab, and you enter the date and the feed slot, and you press save. And that is the quickest and easiest way to tell the model, the platform, that you are grazing that paddock. However, the best way to do it is to go to the grazing planner, and here you can create your grazings. Okay, let's say create grazing for today, For the milkers, the day here, usually you have a day or night feed if you have twice a day milking, and you will press create grazing, and this will take you to the grazing planner. So this is what we call the grazing planner. And here for me is a really important tool. Here basically you are going to see all your paddocks. Here you have the feed witch, and here you have the pasture demand indicator. So basically we're telling you that based on the amount of feed that you are growing and based on the amount of cows that you have, you should be feeding your cows 3.5 kilograms of grass per cow per grazing. So if you're grazing day and night, this will be 7 kilograms per day. Why is that? That's based on the key indicators. That's based on how much grass are you growing. So we are basing this on the principles that we don't want to grass more where is growing, because otherwise we'll be affecting the pasture. So this gives you an indication of how much you should be feeding your cows. And here you can choose your paddocks. And here we include a really using basic formulas and indication of the nutrition of your cows. And you're also can include more feed. So if you're feeding something else than grass, for example, in this farm, they're feeding silage, maize, silage of pasture, or another silo. So you can include all those feed in the table. And you can see if you change that, the table will change as well. So this gives you an indication of the nutritional value of the diet, let's say, and how are your cows gonna perceive that as well. So here you will plan your grazing. This is based on the numbers that you complete here. You will see all the totals here. So this is useful, for example, if you have an operator to know how much to feed on the ration. And here you would press save grazing. So that's the second way to enter a grazing. So in this table, for example, you can also see all your paddocks, and you can see the area, you can see the growth rate, you can see the cover, but you can also see the days since last grazing, days since last fertilization. You can see obviously how many grazings from the paddock based on the amount of kilos that you are feeding. Again, this for me is a really powerful section of the platform. It looks a bit complicated, but imagine if it's the first time you're seeing this, it's a lot of information, you can feel overwhelmed. But with a bit of time, it's really easy to use, and it's really important because here is where you are going to make the most out of pasture area. So that's regarding the grazings and how to enter the grazings. Then another important sections are activities. So a lot of users find this section really important because on top that we use this information for the models. It's important for many people to know what they're doing and to have all the information in the same place. So for example, fertilizations in this farm, they know which paddocks they fertilize, on which date, which type of fertilizer. So all the records are here. They can export these records. You can also put some values there, so you can calculate some economic indicators as well. The same with spraying and planting. So it's like to keep all your records together. Some people use it more than others, again, but I think it's a really important tool as well, or feature as well. Then we have inventory. So feed stuff, you can record all the feed stuff that you have on your farm, and you can put in if you have feed test, you can put feed test story, you can put indication of those quality parameters, and we use all this information as well when we are calculating in the grazing planner as well. So again, it's up to the user of how much they want to use the platform. So there's a lot of there to use, but not every user enter all the information. You can put the stock levels, how much feed do you have? So that's going to be going depleting over time. So your stock is going down, and you can monitor that as well. And then for me, what is very, very important is the reports. So in reports, we have 3 different types of reports. For example, if you go to paddocks performance, this is for me, it's another one that I like the most of the platform, is that if you enter all the information over time, you will be able to know how much grass are you grazing on each of your paddocks, how much grass are you utilizing in each of your paddocks. So therefore you can quantify all the parameters that you need to know. James was very clear on how important it is to quantify pasture utilization. We know that the average dairy farmer in Australia is utilizing, I don't know, 6 or 7 tons per hectare per year, and the potential could be 12 or 15 or 20 tons per hectare. So if we don't quantify those figures, it's very hard to achieve the potential. So by using a tool like this, you can choose your day, you can choose your paddocks, and you can get your figures. But again, to be able to get these figures, you need to enter the information of when are you grazing, when and where, because otherwise the platform is not able to calculate all those figures. But I think this is a really, really powerful section. And then also lately we developed, yes.
Yeah, not just another minute. Can you wrap up in just another minute? We've got quite a few questions to go through as well.
Just lastly, we in the last few couple of months we developed some simple tools. For example, the leaf stage calculator, where you can enter your temperature of your region, and you will have an idea of the leaf stage and how often a new leaf is appearing, or a nitrogen calculator. So different tools that all these tools are based on customer requests, and we try to develop all those little tools to help the user to make better decisions. So that's a quick overview of the platform. I know that could be overwhelming because it's a lot of things, but yeah, let's wrap up there.
Mm. No, that's great, Johan. It is a really extensive platform, and got a lot to offer for our dairy farmers. There's a question here, is what are the most important data input required? Now, in terms of grazing and pasture management, can you just, what are the 3 or 4 most important?
Yeah, so the most important one is grazing. So if the user, it's imperative that they enter the grazings, and then fertilizations in a smaller, it affects the model less, but spraying the same. But grazing is the most important one, that the farmer should enter on a daily, on a weekly basis.
Yeah. Okay, great. There's another question here, Johan. Is there an app that's available that you can add or review information from down in the paddock, or is it all on?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We've been working on the app for a long time now, and it's a request for a lot of our users, and we are trying to release that app as soon as we can, hopefully in the coming months. But that app is going to come with a version 2 of the software. So once we release V2, the app will come together. But yeah, that's very important because the users want to be able to do things on the paddock, and the platform itself, it works on the phone. It works really well, but it works on the browser, which is not ideal. So we are working on the app. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And final question is, what is the accuracy for pastures other than perennial ryegrass? Is it pretty accurate?
So we find it very accurate, especially with ryegrass. It works really well with oats as well. With kikuyo, we have some variable results, but some good results as well. And we are training all the models in other pastures, for example, like lucerne. We are doing a lot of trials, especially in South America. We are getting a lot of attention in South America, but as they use a lot of lucerne, we are developing models for lucerne as well. And we are also working, starting to develop a new product for beef and sheep farmers as well, which they use, for example, in other tropical pastures as well. So yeah, we find that accuracy is quite good with the calibrations we did, especially obviously with ryegrass. Yeah.
Okay, great. I acknowledge there are other questions there, but we've got James is going to come back online and just give us a wrap up about how some of the data that's been used for the Smarter Irrigation in Tasmania. James has got about another 10 minutes-ish, maybe 15 minutes. And I know that now we're running quite short for time. So I'm going to get James back on. If people can hang on and say for until 11:45, that would be fantastic. If you can't, we fully understand it because we have gone over, or we will be going over. But I'm hoping that people can hang on. So James, I'll let you start.
Righto, I'll be very quick then. Just to add to that answer around visual assessments, farmers are quite good at, when they're trained up and they know their pastures, at getting the covers and understanding covers and ordering paddocks from the highest cover to the lowest. But actually assessing growth rate is one of the keys for this particular process around understanding the impact of irrigation. And so a measure of pastures over time, giving you a good assessment of growth rate, is really, really important. Just quickly then around the use of pasture.io in our projects here in Tasmania. Since we've been working on this project area from SIP 1 right through, in our SIP 1 project, essentially what we did is that we wanted to have a tool that we could use in the field for easily entering data and then allowing other team members to be able to access that. So very easy to go into a paddock on a farm, having set up a basic pasture.io account and using that on the phone. And while there isn't an app, the access and the usability of it on the phone is actually quite good. So we would go into paddocks with our plate meter, we would enter the paddock number, we'd then go and plate that paddock, grab that data and put it straight into, with the phone, into the pasture.io. So here's an example of where there's a whole heap of paddocks, 1, 4, 8, and then we would just enter that data for that date, and then that data would be available. So data entered directly into pasture.io on the smartphone, and then it was exported for further analysis. And so we were able to grab that data very quickly, and people back in the office could pull it together to get our pasture growth rate data that we'd then use to assess what was going on. So certainly a very useful tool just for the basic data management side of things. When we went from the SIP 1 project into our Beyond Water Smart project 2 seasons ago, we actually started to get farmers to be involved in collecting data, because we had a number of sites around a reference group, and we wanted those farmers to be measuring and putting that data in so that they too could access that information and see the value of that information for them. And we could very easily then take that data without having to go on to farm, and from the data that was entered, so here's all our paddock data that would have been entered by the farmers, we grabbed that, exported it very easily. So there's an export function into Excel, for instance, to be able to collect the covers, calculate your growth rates. And so for that Beyond Water Smart project, where we were working with a group of farmers in Deloraine, we were then taking that data, and every month as we were catching up with the farmers, we were able to present that data in terms of the growth rates for each of those farms, without having to chase that up, without having to actually go and try and get hold of that data, because it was all being entered into the system. So this particular set of growth rate data here, I think people have probably seen this before. There's 5 different farms. The grey line here is the optimised farm site that we were really focusing on in terms of getting irrigation right. So we've got the growth rates for that farm, and we're comparing it with all these other farms. And so every month when we went along, we'd put this data up, and we'd then work through that data with the farmers around what was happening on those farms and why there might be a difference in the growth rate of, say, some of the farms compared with the optimised farm site. So really useful as a tool to enable farmers to enter, and then for us to be able to take that data and to be able to assess it and put it into a process visually that the farmers could then use as part of that benchmarking process. So we've obviously been using that tool as a basic repository, as a basic database for that growth rate data. With the current project, SIP 2, what we wanted to do was to actually look at the potential for using it for a more autonomous process. And that's why we've been really interested in having a look at the ability for that process with the satellite data and the weather data and all these things coming together to be able to give a really good measure of growth rate up to date, so that we could use it to really bring the message back to the farmers around what was happening as we discussed that in those groups. And here's an example for one of our current sites down at Wood Rising, down in the Midlands there, where that farmer's using the information, the satellite data is going in autonomously. And what we can do is that instead of us having to do all the work behind the scenes in pulling that together, is that we're actually getting our growth rates up to date. So here it provides up-to-date data results for discussion. So here, the blue line here. So when we go and visit that farm with the group, we can then bring this up, look at it, and have a discussion around it in terms of its growth rates, in terms of its covers. But the other important thing is, and this is where we've really seen how important it is to get particularly the grazing data in. If we don't have the grazing data up to date, what we've found with a lot of the farms that we've been working with is that the accuracy of that data coming back is nowhere near as good as what we want it to be. So using this tool now, we can actually go in as the researchers who are involved in this work and have a look at what the grazing data and other information is that's being added. So on this particular example here, right here in front of us, is for this particular paddock that we're looking at, is the data that's been entered around the grazings and the fertilisation. And so we can look at that and say, are we confident that this data is going to be representative of what's happening? And this gives us a lot of confidence around that. But in our project, what we're also doing is we're doing measurements over the next couple of years using cages where we're taking cuts and other hand measurements, so that we can really get a feel for how confident we can be. But if everything is entered correctly, our experience to date is that it's doing a good job, and we can use it regularly and be confident with that with our groups. If the data isn't being entered, so the background grazing data, will then we lose some confidence in the ability to get that good result and feedback. So a really important piece of information that we've learned, and I think that's been backed up by what Joan's saying. Definitely the grazings are an important part of that process. So that was just a really quick overview of the way we've been using it, starting off as a basic tool for a database through to now assessing the use of it in an autonomous way. Because let's face it, we all get busy, and being able to collect that data, sometimes we don't get around to it. If we can have an autonomous way of doing it, where all we have to do is really just enter our grazings, and that certainly is a big efficiency saver in terms of labour. That's probably enough, because otherwise we're going to run out of time.
Thanks, James. That's great. Has anyone got any questions for James around that and how they're using the pasture.io down in Tasmania for the Beyond Water Smart project? I think it's really, really interesting, James, and it's definitely the way that we're trying to head in terms of smarter irrigation for profit on the mainland as well. And that's about getting people to look at, measure and monitor what they're doing and what their pasture growth rates are, and use that information to actually improve what they might be doing on farm. So that's certainly, one of the big aims of all of the irrigation projects. And sometimes those improvements are just that scheduling. The timing of irrigation doesn't cost any more money, and it is really just about that improvement to get further productivity. Yep. There's a couple of questions here for you, Joan. We might ask them. There's a question here. Do you have a video tutorial that people can get online for using pasture.io and learn more about it? Because that was a great overview.
Yeah. So if you sign up and you create your own farm, then each of them. If I share my screen for a second. So each can you see my screen now?
Yep.
So each of the different tools, they have all videos. So if you click there, you will see a video which is explaining how to use that tool. We also have the speech here. We also have almost 24/7 customer service. So if you pop up a question there, or you call us straight, we will be able to help you. But writing your question here is very useful. And we also can do a screen sharing sessions. So we are able to get into the computer together with you, and we can show you around our platform.
Yep. Okay, great. Good question too. Kylie's asking too, and this might go to you, Anne, or James, given that we're sort of using the platform in Smarter Irrigation, but how does this platform compare to other methods of measuring pastures autonomously?
Yeah, there's really not many options available for autonomous measurement of covers available on the market. We did a lot of work prior to this around pastures from space, which was based in Western Australia, and there was some very good availability of data around growth rate. The big issue with that particular service was the satellites that were being used and the regularity of that data. So it wasn't regular enough to be able to give us enough data consistently to be able to respond to that. And so that certainly was a problem. That particular service, there is a service in New Zealand that LIC, I think, are involved with, but here in Australia, I mean, Ollie, I'm not sure of any others that I'm aware of from an autonomous point of view that, and I think you rightly point out that if you're just using satellite data, you're not going to get the accuracy you want to. And so this to me is here for us is the one that's available locally for use.
Yep. To jump in there, there's the only other services around more like pastures from space, but pastures from space isn't running currently,
No.
and they all rely heavily on satellite imagery. So from what Juan and James have expressed is that we need the third part of that puzzle, which is grazing records, and grazing records will help us overcome the limitations of satellite imagery alone. So satellite imagery alone has severe limitations, and no one's pretending any different. But with the modelling that we've done, collecting paddock activities such as fert and spraying and harvesting and grazings, then we can overcome those satellite limitations to get within the really good window of dairy farm pastures, like the pastures behind me, 1,500 to 3,500 kilos.
Oh.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ollie. Thanks, James. I think another question here is how many dairy farms have adopted pasture.io, and what have farmers told you what some of the barriers to adoption of it would be? Good question.
Yep. So
while you're there,
the number of dairy farms is growing. I'm not going to explicitly say how many, but we've got dairy farmers from Australia, New Zealand, UK, and we're, like Juan expressed, we've got not just dairy farms, but farms going into Latin America, so Argentina and Uruguay and Paraguay and Chile. And what was the other bit of the question? Sorry.
Some of the barriers to adoption.
Barriers to adoption. So
what people say.
Barriers to adoption, I guess it's a very new technology. So it's an education process, and there's been a lot of bad press with what's happening with the LIC space in New Zealand, just purely because of the limitations of satellite imagery alone. So it's a real education process, and that's what we keep coming up against. And that's why we put so much focus into customer success, and our core is to provide as much service as we can. As Juan pointed out, it's almost a 24-hour customer service line, and that is to be there and help farmers whenever they have questions. So I guess a core barrier is the understanding of the technology, and then we can break it down into other barriers, which are things like entering in grazing records and things like that. So, and that just comes back to us as feedback that we need to make it easier to enter in grazing records. Until we can automate grazing records, which might be collars on cows or ear tags with GPS chips and things like that, until we can do that, then there's always going to be this limitation with the current satellite technology. I mean, there's more satellite technology coming out, like as in the optics and different sensors being put on remote sensing, but we're not there yet to remove that input of grazing activities and FERT activities and things like that. The way we try to mitigate that is by saying, well, it comes down to, do you want to step up to that next level of pasture management, and do you really want to drive your growth rates or utilize your pasture as best as you can? And to do that, one, you need to have recorded your grazing so you can get a good understanding of how many days that paddock's been growing for, and whoever can hold all that information in their head is pretty impressive. So it's about relieving that mental burden to allow the farmer to be able to make best grazing decisions with data that is recorded and collected. And that's the part that we're trying to automate.
Okay. Thanks, Ollie.
Yeah.
One last question. Can people identify where on the farm they are from on the program on your phone? Now, I'll just read that again. Can people identify where on the farm they are from the program on your phone? That is, can you staff find the correct paddock easier? So I guess it's about location on farm. Yeah,
there is a location, so you can identify your location on the map. That needs fixing at the moment, but that's about it. Yeah. Otherwise, there is that feature. You'll see if you opened up the app on your phone and to the web browser, went to the map, you'd see there was a location finder, but needs currently fixing, which is rolling into the V2, that version 2 that Juan mentioned. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, look, thank you to all our speakers. I think we'll wrap it up there. We have gone 10 minutes over time. So thank you to everybody for hanging on until the end and getting the full picture. I think that we really had a really good overview of the value and the benefit of measuring and monitoring and analysing your pasture growth rates. And pasture.io is a way that within Smarter Irrigation, we are moving forward with some research and looking at how we can use the platform within Smarter Irrigation. So Yuan and Ollie have given us a really good overview, and it's a very extensive program. And certainly James has added to that again by looking at how in the Beyond Water Smart project, which is very, very similar to what we're doing on the mainland with our reference groups, how they've used pasture.io within their groups and providing that data so that we can look at where the data is and what the potential is, and hopefully motivating people to make changes based on the information that they've got from the systems that we're doing. This has been recorded, so we will be sending the recording out. Should have mentioned that right at the beginning, sorry. And there's some questions there that we might get some written answers to as well for those that I haven't gone through. So thank you again to all our speakers. Thank you to all the participants for hanging on the line and using the new technology that we've all got very, very used to now, I think. It's great, and look forward to seeing you all back here on the 28th of July for our next webinar.